everyone. Welcome to the Continuous Quality Improvement tutorial series, where we are going to cover important topics and answer frequently asked questions regarding implementing a CQI cycle at your club. My name is Rachel Keener. I'm a Director of Quality Improvement at BGCA. I worked with the YPQA and CQI at a club before coming to BGCA, and I am passionate about making these meaningful tools as accessible as possible to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Clark Hill. I am also a Director of Quality Improvement at BGCA. I have been working with CQI systems and the YPQA in various settings throughout the country. I am super excited to be able to share all of this information that we've been able to learn. Thank you so much for joining us. Now let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Preparing for Team-Based Planning. This is a video guide to help you get started when you are about to embark on a planning conversation with your team using the tools and resources available on the CQI toolkit as part of a continuous quality improvement cycle. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some housekeeping. All the resources that I'm talking about today, including a review of this whole subject and links to different how-to videos, can be found on the CQI toolkit. If you have additional questions that are not answered in this video, you can email quality@bgca.org or pqa@bgca.org. And you are always encouraged and welcome to schedule a one-on-one consultation with the quality improvement team. There's a button to find that consultation link right on the website, and we should be able to answer any questions that you have from there. So here are the objectives of our video today. First, it's to understand the importance of planning using a team-based approach. Then we are going to learn ways to prepare your team for a productive planning conversation. We're going to explore the team-based planning resources available through the CQI toolkit, including our new self-directed team-based planning learning coach module that'll help facilitate that conversation for you and your staff. Finally, we're going to review next steps in getting started with planning. So before we get started, I'm going to review a concept that was introduced at the very beginning of our CQI resources, and that is the Quest logic model. If you remember, we start with high quality instruction and high quality content, so like high quality programs, curriculum, etc., which leads to youth coming more often and being more engaged when they're there. When they show up more to these programs, they have a greater chance of an opportunity to develop the skills and beliefs that the club is trying to impart on our youth and help them develop. And when they have lots of opportunities to practice that at the club, they have an even greater chance of taking those skills and beliefs and transferring them into other areas of their lives. What we're going to be focusing on today is the very start and foundation of this logic model, and that is quality instruction and content. This is where we have the most agency to control. It's when we focus on improving our programs and our staff practice, that is really where we can make our biggest impact on setting youth up for success. The reason why I'm taking the time to highlight this today is because the team-based planning approach focuses on the very root of this logic model. How can you get your whole team have a voice at the table, to be part of the conversation, to make sure that everybody's improving and running high quality programs together? And in order to do that, you start by including everyone in the conversation for what you're going to do and what you're going to improve, which is why we are advocating for a team-based planning approach. So on this slide, you'll see some benefits of team-based planning. When you're thinking about creating your team, you want to prioritize frontline and program staff, the folks who are doing the work. Again, all aspects of a Boys and Girls Clubs are important. They are needed to make it run effectively. But when we look at the Quest logic model, we see that the foundational level of impact is quality instruction and quality in content. And so those folks at your club who are running the programs, who are engaging with those practices, need to be at the table when planning happens. When you're creating your team, be mindful of power dynamics. Club leadership should consider themselves as facilitators, but not directors of the whole conversation. Consider inviting program participants and members to your planning meeting. So here are some of the benefits when you take the time to plan with your whole team. It creates greater diversity of input and perspectives, which results in more well-rounded and actionable goals. There's less opportunity for oversight, for you to sort of single-handedly jump to a conclusion about what a solution might be while missing other viewpoints and eyes on the club and what's going on. It also develops a shared understanding for club goals and priorities, and it results in increased buy-in from the folks who are doing the work. Those last two bullets are very important when you are considering that this is a change management process. You are leading a staff team through improvement. And in order to do that, they need to be bought into the plan from the get-go. It might require more planning and more energy, but the benefits of taking the time to lead your whole team through a conversation are well worth it. So let's review the continuous quality improvement cycle. Again, this is just a refresher similar to our Quest logic model. The way that we are working to improve our programming to make sure that we have high quality instruction and high quality content is through a cycle of continuous quality improvement, which is a cyclical process designed to explore opportunities to improve quality at the club. You do that by analyzing data that you've collected, and making a plan with your team and implementing those improvement plans. Today, and for our planning conversation, we are rooted in phase 2 of CQI, the plan phase. So we will be spending all of our time there. When we were talking with you, or when you were reviewing resources for data tracking for CQI, maybe you were poking around on the CQI toolkit and looking at what was available. You saw information on our data buckets. Sometimes we call these data categories, but it's a way that we group data so that we can think about creating a holistic and well-rounded picture of the club. When we originally presented this concept to you, we were talking about it from a place of thinking about what you want to collect on your program. What's your data collection plan? What information do you want to make sure you have access to? Now we are taking inventory for what we were actually able to collect. So we're about ready to embark in planning. What information do we have available to us? I'm going to go through each of these individually so that we review what each of these buckets is all about. So the first one is quality practices. This assesses staff practice, such as staff interactions, incorporating youth voice, etc., and how successful your staff are at incorporating those in every program. To get this data, you use a research-validated tool like the Youth Program Quality Assessment or others noted on the screen. Most of you will be getting this data from your Youth Program Quality Assessment, and we will be talking about how to do that in a little bit. The second data bucket is attendance and participation data. So put very simply, this is any information that tells you who's coming to your club and how often. We most frequently see this referred to as annual membership, average daily attendance, frequency of attendance, but you can also get a little bit more nuanced with it and look at program-specific data, demographic information, trend data, all sorts of things. So we'll want to make sure we've got this present for planning conversations as well. Next, we have youth outcomes. This is any information that measures the success of your program. You can think about this as what you would put in a grant report or voicing to funders as all the great things that the club is doing for youth. Or on the flip side, information that you might use to identify needs in the community or amongst your members. Most folks get this from the NYOI outcomes report, but it could also include program-specific pre-post tests, report cards, social emotional learning measures, etc. And finally, the fourth data bucket is club experiences. You may also see this referred to as program experiences. When that happens, we're talking about the same thing. This is any information that tells you how participants, members, parents, and other stakeholders experience your club and the programs and activities within it. To differentiate from youth outcomes, think about youth outcomes might tell us how often our youth are attending school, whether or not they are participating in risky behaviors. Club experience data is going to tell us how folks feel when they're at the club. Do they feel safe, both physically and emotionally? Do they have strong connections with adults? Are they having fun? Most folks get this information from the NYOI Club Experience data section, but you could also get this from parent surveys, pulse checks, polls, and listening sessions. So now that we've reviewed the data buckets, go ahead and think to yourself, what data did your club collect during the assess phase? What do you have access to? And in what form is it? So on a very small picture on the screen is the data collection worksheet. It is available on the plan phase of the CQI toolkit for you to download and fill out, but you are also just welcome to pull up a piece of paper, pause this video, and jot down what goes in each category. You might have multiple things listed within each square or within each category, which is completely fine. Just list out all the sources because you are going to use this later when you're thinking about what you need to do to gather to have your planning conversation. Now that you've had a chance to jot down all the data that your club has collected during the assess phase, or that you have access to, we are going to dissect each bucket and talk through some of the best practices of taking that data, deciding what's going to be most useful for your planning conversation, and giving you some advice for how to structure that to make it usable and sort of trim some of the fat that you might not need, if you will. So the first one that we're going to start with is quality practice data. I'm going to give you some general tips, and then I will take the time to walk you through very basic how to pull the report on Scores Reporter. So PQA data, if you have it, can be found on portal.cypq.org. It's the same website that you go to enter in your PQA scores. If you've been doing your PQAs on hard copy, and not entering into the system to Scores Reporter, we very much suggest that you take the time before your planning conversation to go ahead and enter those scores, because the reports that it spits out make having conversations about the data much easier, and you can track it over time. So access your reports through the same place you entered them. Reports can be pulled for each individual assessment or multiple assessments, which will then allow you to average your results across sites. We recommend, though, even though you can do that you pull one report per assessment to include comments. And I'll show you what that means right here now. But if you'd like to go back and review just this section and how to pull these reports in Scores Reporter, those video tutorials are available to you on the CQI Toolkit's Assess phase if you click the Scores Reporter section. Okay, so this is your landing page when you log on to the online portal. You'll see my version has a few more options than you might, just because I have access to BGCA's data network. But when you want to go pull a report to review with your team, this is what we recommend you do. So you click, rather than export data or any of these other things, click Create Report. You'll have two options, but you want to click PQA, stands for Program Quality Assessment, because you want to review the assessment data. If you have both options, you can choose if you did a school-aged PQA, it will be in that section. If you did a youth PQA, it will be this one. Most of you will just have the youth PQA option. So when you log on, you should just see your organization and a list of sites. But because I am at the national office, we are going to pick a random site to do something with. So I'm going to go in here and look at a report that I used, that I submitted. And I go down until I find the site that I want. For you, again, this will be much easier. But here's the important part. So I am going to select my forms that I want. I can choose between myself or external. Most of you will be just selecting self-forms unless you've had an external assessment from a rated assessor. And when you click this little box, all of the forms that are available to you will show up. It'll include the date that the assessment happened on, what program was observing, and what form was being used. So all you do is select that. And here's the important part. Click Run Report with Comments. What that will do is when the software spits out the report, it will also give you the anecdotal evidence or supporting evidence. Here's what a YPQA report looks like when you run it with comments, which is the suggested format that you should use for your team-based planning conversation. It starts with an intro as to how to read the report, what scoring means, all of that, breaks it down a little bit. And then it gives you a summary of how you scored in each domain. And as you continue to scroll down, you will eventually find all of the anecdotal evidence that the assessor put in for your program. So when you're reviewing data with your team, if you are scrolling through your planning and one of your team members says, why did I only get a 3 for multiple planning strategies? Like, that doesn't make sense. You can scroll down, read the anecdotal evidence, and see why that score was given. The next bucket we're going to look at is how to break down your attendance and participation data, and some helpful tips to consider when you're trying to figure out what to bring. Oftentimes with attendance and participation data, we've got access to a lot of different things and many different ways to break it down. And it might be tempting to print off all the information we want, or on the flip side, just do the bare minimum ADA membership frequency of attendance. But I want you to think a little bit about what is going to be most useful for your team's planning conversations. We recommend that you pull hard copy versions of your attendance tracking software. Most folks at this point have their attendance information stored on the cloud where you can sort of pull it up. But if you are having a team meeting, it can be helpful to have hard copies of the essential information printed off and ready to go for people to review. There are 2 questions that I want you to consider when you're thinking about what you're going to prioritize for attendance and participation data. The first one is, what general information would be useful to your team's conversation? What are your foundational measures of health that will give folks an idea of where you're at? Is it membership, ADA, frequency of attendance? Do you want to pull attendance trend information, demographic information? There isn't a standard formula for what you have to bring to these meetings. Really consider what your planning conversation will be about and what will be most useful. Then think about what specific information would be useful to your team's conversation. Do you want to look at specific program data? Are there already areas that your team has identified that they would like to plan on improving, like teen attendance, virtual programming? What information would help guide that conversation? Next, we have youth outcomes. And we're going to talk about a couple different sources of data for youth outcomes, and we'll start with NYOI. So most folks get their youth outcomes data by NYOI through specific outcomes reports. So on the screen is a bunch of information about how the different report types that are available to you, the different reporting levels, and demographic filters. I know it looks like a lot. I'm going to go over what each of these 3 sections is talking about, and then I'll show you what that page looks like. So for report types, you can think about this as how do you want to view the data? So your detail report is going to give you the most information. Your trend data is going to allow you to see multiple years of data so you can look at changes over time. Benchmark data will compare your results to other clubs your size in your area or the national office. And then you go on from here, demographic comparison, club comparison between sites, etc. What we suggest for the most productive team planning conversations is using that detail report. And I'll show you why in a little bit. When you look at the report level, I think this is fairly self-explanatory. pull the report for the team you're working with. So if you're an administrative team or a board having a conversation about your organization as a whole, maybe you pull your organization data, or you pull every site and your organization data. If you're a team at one club working with your site staff, go ahead and just pull the site data. Finally, you have the option to add demographic filters. So you can filter your results by age group, frequency of attendance, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. We suggest that you start with no filter and look at your site as a whole, unless your organization is discussing a specific program or area of concern for your club. As you filter down, your results will become more and more limited. So if you have a year where you haven't had quite as many youth take the survey, you may not see a lot of results if you add a bunch of filters to it. And then in NYOI, when you are deciding what reports you want to run, you'll see that there's a variety of options, and only some of which fall into the youth outcomes category. You'll see them listed on the screen. The outcome areas are safety, academic success, good character and citizenship, healthy lifestyles, and social emotional development. What's also included in here is any of the additional selections that you may have requested when you signed up for NYOI, like your workforce information or STEM, that can be used in your youth outcomes data. So we're going to show you a crash course tutorial and where you can find some of this information, but these tutorial videos are also available on the CQI toolkit, and you can get additional assistance from the NYOI team by emailing measurement@bgca.org. So here's your landing page when you go to bgca.net/mydata. For our purposes right now, we're going to be focusing on this member survey for youth outcomes. Once you've gotten here, you'll see all of the categories that I mentioned in the previous slide. So here's where we can select report type, where we can load any filters we want, the report level, whether or not we want to choose a year, any kind of demographic information. All of that can be done right on this landing page. For our purposes, I'm going to show you a basic outcomes report in the format that we suggest you use for team-based planning. So I'm going to keep it at the detail report so I can see as detailed information as possible. We're going to keep the level at the national level. And for our outcomes area, I'm going to leave all this the same. I'm not going to select any filters and demographic information. We're going to look at 2020 data. If you go to academic success and generate that report, and you go down to the item level, this is what your team should focus on when you're having a planning conversation. To export that information and make it usable, to print it out as part of your planning conversation, click this Export tab right here on the screen, and you can choose a Word document, a PDF, or Excel. If you are an Excel savvy person who likes all the data in one place, go ahead and download the spreadsheet. If you are not as comfortable with Excel and your team wants an easy thing to look at, go ahead and download that PDF. NYOI data can be filtered and organized in many different ways, and just like attendance and participation, it is totally up to you to consider what will be the most useful for your team's planning. Are you using your planning time to improve a specific area at the club? Do you want to just focus on academic success data, or are you looking holistically? Also, consider the number of surveys you collected. If you didn't have a huge sample size, or it was only a certain population of youth who took it, it's okay to use that context in your planning conversation. I mentioned earlier that there are additional modules that you have options to add to your NYOI survey experience, such as workforce, STEM, arts, etc. In order to get that data, email measurement@bgca.org, and they will send you an Excel spreadsheet of your data. My final note on NYOI is that remember, survey data is a useful snapshot of one day at your club. Surveying young people is a challenging thing to do, and I know that staff sometimes have feelings about and reactions to some of the data that they're seeing. It can be helpful to frame the conversation with acknowledging that this is a youth survey. It's useful. We will take the information for what it is, but also consider the larger context of all the other data that we have available to us as we're making our planning conversation. So still thinking about youth outcomes, but moving beyond NYOI, I'd like you to consider if you have any pre and post tests, school information, STEM, reading literacy scores. You can bring anything that you feel is relevant and that you have access to this section of the conversation. Remember that program pre and post tests and grades and all that should be put in a usable format so that when you are having that planning conversation with your team, you aren't scrolling through individual posts and doing all that organizing in the actual meeting. Go ahead and take the time to put it in an Excel spreadsheet and Google Sheets, summarize it in a Word document. And on that note, consider everything you have, but prioritize bringing what you need and what will be useful. So very last data bucket is our club experience, or sometimes, like I said, you'll see this referred to as program experiences. Most folks get this information from the NYOI Club Experience Report. It's found in the same place as the outcomes report that I showed you earlier, so I am not going to navigate back to that page. But the note that I want you to take away from is it's important to use the detail report. So rather than the overall or optimal sort of roll-up data, you'll be able to see how many or what percentage of youth strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree about particular questions. Most staff find that information resonates the best with them and is the easiest to understand. So I highly recommend running that detail report for your club experience data. Any other sources you have for club experience data, like pulse checks, listening sessions, parent surveys, program evaluations, or feedbacks from field trips, whatever you have. Same note as before. Go ahead and make sure that data is in a usable format so that when you're sitting and planning with your team, you aren't having to do a ton of administrative background work to make the conversation happen. Folks can just pay attention to what's important. So that concludes our summary of our best practices in how to think about pulling your data, organizing your data, etc. But the main takeaway from this section is once you've identified the data that you would like to bring, take the time to put it in a format that will be easy for your team to review and make meaning of together. Again, there is no solid formula around you need XYZ information to make improvement planning successful. What's important is the conversation, and you can foster that conversation best when everyone has what they need to engage. So now that we have talked about how to pull data for all the 4 data buckets, your best practices in report filing, and how to make it easy to use for your team, we're going to talk about actually using the team-based planning tool. So I'll show you where that is now on the CQI Toolkit. When you log on to the CQI Toolkit, this is your landing page. And to no surprise, team-based planning is going to be on the plan page. So go ahead and click Begin. It's the first thing you see when you log on and click this page. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the user guide. This will be the place where you start to get all the information on how long each section takes, how you facilitate it, what you're going to need to make the day successful. It includes a material list, other helpful information. Underneath the user guide is the supporting documents page. So this is where you're going to get all the information you need that you will use on the actual day when you're working with your team. The actual tool is a guide that helps sort of co-facilitate between you as the leader of the conversation or another staff person and guided video. So it's on YouTube. You can click play right from the CQI Toolkit. And what it does is walk you through a planning process with prompts to pause, questions, space for community builders, etc., so that your team can move through an engaging process that was designed by some very cool youth development organizations that care a lot about high quality programming. I also want to note that in the user guide, there are timestamps and an agenda for navigating around this tool. So if you want to skip a section, if you're revisiting something, you can go right back to the area that's useful rather than watching the whole video over again. As far as next steps go, the next thing you should do is review the team-based planning user guide and the resources on the CQI Toolkit's plan page. Then identify your planning team and set a date to get it done. The time needed for this depends on the amount of data that's being reviewed and the size of your team. But we recommend that the minimum amount of time for reviewing 1 or 2 data sets is about 2 hours. If time is an issue, structure and spread your planning conversations across multiple days or meetings. Some folks decide to use this by doing it over the course of 2 or 3 staff meetings where that time is dedicated to a different section. Prepare your data using the tools discussed in this training, just like we went over, and consider printing off hard copies for each team member for easy review. Don't forget to make it fun. What food and drinks do folks need? Do they need games or fidget toys, background music? Data planning can be tiring. Your brain is working really hard. You're having conversations that might feel difficult about club priorities. So the more fun that you can make it, the better it will go. Again, any questions that you have, the CQI Toolkit is going to be your first spot for where you're going to find that answer. I'll remind you that there is that helpful consultation button where if you would just like to sit down with somebody from the quality improvement team and get your questions answered, click that, get on our calendars, and we would be happy to walk you through anything that is still concerning. If you'd like to send us an email directly, you can reach out to cqitoolkit@bgca.org. Thank you all for your time today. I hope you enjoy your planning conversations with your team, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing.